welcome everybody. Thank you so much for logging in today. My name's Debbie from NDI's Property Australia, and I'm very excited because we have a bit of a different webinar today. Rather than talking about locations and demand and different properties that builders have got and SDA providers are offering, then we actually have Sean Kirkland from Formspace Building Design. He's a building designer. And we have Svendsen from Bluewing Care. Lauren is an OT, occupational therapist. So they're going to be talking today about what goes in to actually designing an SDA property, why it's so important to get everything right from the outset. Particularly, I guess, Lauren, you'll go into more detail here, but particularly for the actual participants who are going to be living in the property, as well as the carers working there. And Sean will be going through how that is actually translated into the plans for a property. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. Now, we are recording this webinar, and the slide presentations from both Lauren and Sean will also be sent out to everybody in the next day or two. So you'll get a recording of the webinar and the slides. If you've got any questions at all, please just pop them into the little Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. We'll attempt to answer them either during the session or afterwards when Sean and Lauren have both presented. We'll then do our Q&A and answer any questions that haven't been addressed during the presentations. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to start your presentation and tell us all about what an OT does and how important it is.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, my name's Lauren. I'm an OT originally from South Africa, but I have worked in the UK in the home mod space and property space, as well as now in the NDIS space within Australia. I'm going to start out with my presentation. Let me... Okay. So what I want us to all remember as we start out is that SDA is more than just the accommodation. As OTs, we are very client-centered, and we want to be able to represent that in our assessments for SDA properties. So as providers, it's crucial to recognize that an SDA property is more than just a structure. It's someone's home, a sanctuary where individuals with disabilities find comfort, independence, and a sense of belonging. We are privileged to be a part of that journey, entrusted with the responsibility of creating an environment that supports their unique needs, aspirations, and dreams. Every decision we make, from the design and construction to the ongoing support and care, is infused with a profound understanding of the significance of the space in their lives. It's a privilege to witness the transformation of a mere structure into a warm and welcoming home where residents can thrive, forge meaningful connections, and lead fulfilling lives. As providers, we should be deeply committed to honoring this privilege by continuously striving to enhance the quality of life and well-being of those we serve, fostering a sense of community and ensuring that each individual feels valued, respected, and empowered within the walls of their home. What I'm going to start off with is the OT role within SDA space. So we start out with a comprehensive assessment of individuals with disabilities to identify their functional needs and requirements for living in specialized accommodation. This includes assessing activities of daily living, mobility, safety, and accessibility needs. And we are commenting on the NDIS domains, which is self-care, self-maintenance, mobility, learning, communication, and social interaction. Once we've completed that comprehensive assessment, we then look at collaborative solution seeking. That's within the NDIS space, as well as with the families and the people with disabilities. We then have to prove to the NDIS SDA eligibility. So this is we go through two routes, like I'll explain on the next slide, which is extreme functional impairment or very high support needs. And then we look into the NDIS SDA design standards, and actually in our reports to the NDIS when applying for SDA funding, we comment on each one of the clauses that needs to be specific to our participant that we are trying to get the SDA funding for. So in terms of collaborating with building designers, we need a user-centered design. So as OTs, we have to bring a deep understanding of the functional needs and limitations of individuals with disabilities. By collaborating with the building designers, we ensure that the design process prioritizes specific requirements of the residents, resulting in a living space that truly cater to their needs. Maximizing independence. Our goal as OTs is to maximize independence and quality of life for all individuals with disabilities. So through collaboration with building designers, we can create environments that promote autonomy and enable residents to carry out activities of daily living with greater ease and confidence. Safety and accessibility. OTs are experts in assessing safety and accessibility needs. By working closely with building designers, we can identify potential hazards and barriers within the living environment and implement design solutions to mitigate those risks and enhance accessibility for residents and caregivers. Optimizing functionality. Effective collaboration between OTs and building designers ensures that SDA dwellings are not only accessible, but also highly functional. By incorporating features such as adjustable height countertops, wide doorways, and accessible bathing facilities, we can create those living spaces that facilitate independence and improve overall functionality for our residents. And this is where it comes in with looking at it not just as a structure, but as a home for a person. We also look at enhancing caregiver support. This means that the collaboration between OTs and building designers extends beyond meeting the needs of residents to also address the requirements of caregivers or support workers within the NDIS space. So by incorporating features such as accessible storage solutions, ergonomic workspaces, and designated care areas, we can create environments that support caregivers in providing high quality care while prioritizing their own well-being. Promoting inclusion. Through collaboration, OTs and building designers can ensure that SDA dwellings are designed with inclusivity in mind. By creating environments that accommodate a diverse range of abilities and preferences, we can then foster a sense of belonging and promote social inclusion among residents and with disabilities. Long-term sustainability. By integrating principles of universal design and sustainability into the planning and design process, OTs and building designers can create SDA dwellings that are not only functional and accessible, but also environmentally friendly and cost-effective in the long term. And we always look at that holistic approach. So OTs look at the holistic approach, considering not only the physical disabilities, but also cognitive, sensory, and psychosocial factors. Collaboration ensures that all aspects of residents' well-being are taken into account, leading to more comprehensive and effective design solutions, as you and I would do within our own homes. When we're trying to get SDA funding for our participants, this flow diagram done by the Summer Foundation is how we then prove that the participants meet the reasonable and necessary criteria. So it needs to be related to the disability. So the support must be directly related to the participant's disability and aim to address the impact of their impairment on their functional capacity and daily life. It needs to be effective. So the support must be likely to be effective and produce measurable outcomes that improve the participant's independence, social inclusion, and overall well-being. It has to be value for money. The support must represent value for money, meaning it's cost effective and provides benefit that outweighs the cost associated with its provision. And it's not the responsibility of another system. So we have to prove that this SDA support is not the responsibility of another service system, such as healthcare, education, or housing. The NDIS is not intended to fund supports that are the responsibility of other sectors. It takes into account informal support. So the support must take into account informal supports already available to the participant, including support provided by families, friends, and community networks. So those are the NDIS reasonable and necessary criteria that we have to comment on throughout our reports to show the eligibility of the participant for SDA funding. So they play a significant role in determining whether a person with a disability is eligible for funding for this type of housing. It needs to qualify for SDA funding. The participant's need for specialized accommodation must meet the reasonable and necessary criteria. This means it needs to be directly related to participants' disability, and has to meet all of their needs, so that it needs to have longevity as well. Overall, the reasonable and necessary criteria serve as a guiding framework to ensure that NDIS funds are allocated to support and services that will make a meaningful difference in the lives of people with disabilities, including their access to appropriate housing options such as SDA. So as you can see, we will then, as OTs, choose, if we've already seen based on the functional capacity assessment that our participant is likely eligible for SDA, we go down one of two streams. We either go down the extreme functional impairment stream or the very high support needs. So when we go through this, we're commenting on each of these different areas, and it's only at the end where we, at point number 16, where we actually decide on the building type based on all these criteria being met. So whether it's going to be the villa, duplex, townhouse or group, number of participants, and then the support model, which we will be recommending within the SDA. We then look at the design category. So that's either the basic, improved livability, fully accessible, robust, or high physical support, and then the location. So that's the last step. We have to prove all of these steps first to ensure that the NDIS can see that the participant does meet those reasonable and necessary criteria. So we all know the different design categories. What I'm going to do now is what we as OTs consider some of the strengths of each of the designs and what we consider under each design category. So improve livability. So the strengths of that, it focuses on creating comfortable and functional living environments for residents with disabilities, incorporating features such as ample natural light, ventilation, adaptable spaces to enhance residents' qualities of life. The considerations that we need to take into account: while improved livability properties prioritize comfort and functionality, they may not always meet the specific needs of individuals with high physical support requirements. So we need to then assess the property's design to ensure it can accommodate residents' functional abilities and promote independence. This is especially true in those cases where the disability is likely to potentially get worse down the line. So we need to make sure that we are looking at a space or a home that can take that into account. Robust. So the strengths are that they're built to withstand the demands of daily use by individuals with disabilities. So featuring durable materials, construction techniques that can endure frequent use, and also behaviors of concern. And then the consideration, so that while robust properties prioritize durability and longevity, they may not always prioritize aesthetics or comfort. So from an OT's perspective, it's important to ensure that the robust design does not compromise accessibility, safety, or the overall well-being of residents in terms of emotional, cognitive, and sensory aspects. Fully accessible. Oh, sorry. Fully accessible. So the strengths are that it's prioritized universal design principles to ensure that all aspects of the living environment are usable by individuals with disabilities. But the considerations are that they may vary in terms of robustness, livability, and specific support provisions. So OTs then go in and assess the property's design holistically, considering factors such as durability, comfort, and the level of support available to residents with varying needs. And then lastly, the high physical support. It's designed to meet the complex needs of individuals, featuring specialized infrastructure such as ceiling hoists, adjustable countertops, and accessible bathrooms. But we need to consider as OTs providing essential features for residents with complex needs, as it then might have limited flexibility for residents with varying levels of independence, or where the independence changes from day to day with some of the complex needs. So we need to then balance the provision of necessary support with opportunities for residents to engage in activities of daily living autonomously. Some of my OT tips to consider when considering an SDA design. I don't like the wording minimum design standards because that's what often is what is then met. So I'm saying maximize the design standards, striving to exceed minimum accessibility and safety standards and incorporating future-proofing measures in the design of specialist disability accommodation spaces can save money in the long run and benefits the participants in several ways. Reduced retrofitting costs by incorporating features that go beyond basic accessibility and safety requirements from the outset. Builders or providers can avoid the need for costly retrofitting or modifications later on. Retrofitting existing structures to meet higher standards can be expensive and disruptive, and also delays moving in time for the participant if they have the SDA funding. Enhanced property value. So designing with maximum standards are likely to be more attractive to potential residents and investors. Properties that offer superior accessibility, safety, and future-proofing features may command higher rental or resale prices, resulting in the increased property values and return on investment. Minimize maintenance expenses, future-proofing measures such as durable materials, flexible layouts, adaptable infrastructure. And we as OTs focus on that adaptability so that it can be adaptable like yours or my home is for the needs of the participant. Increased market demand. As awareness and the demand for accessible and inclusive housing options continues to grow, SDA properties designed with maximum standards are likely to appeal to a broader market of potential residents. And this is where the OTs can come in, because something that is going to, for example, serve the purpose for someone in a wheelchair with, say, for instance, a T10 or a T9, say, for instance, is going to be different to that for a T4. So that's the level of spinal cord injury. And that needs to be the adaptable value of the property. So builders who prioritize usability, inclusivity, and future-proofing in their design standards may attract more participants and secure higher occupancy rates, resulting in a greater financial stability and profitability. And then alignment with NDIS sustainability goals. The NDIS encourages sustainable and cost-effective solutions that promote long-term independence and well-being for participants. By designing SDA spaces that exceed minimum standards and anticipate future needs, builders can support the NDIS sustainability goals while providing residents with a higher quality of life and greater autonomy. This can then be, the accommodation can then allow for greater use for different disabilities. And this is where understanding different types of disability, different types of equipment, different types of modifications is really important when designing these homes. So overall, investing in maximum design standards and future-proofing yields significant savings for builders in the long run, while simultaneously benefiting participants by providing them with safer, more accessible, and more sustainable living environments. By prioritizing usability, inclusivity, and innovation in the designs, builders can create SDA properties that meet the evolving needs of residents and contribute to those positive outcomes for both residents and the investors, and overall achieving the home status for participants. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. That was really informative. Got a couple of questions that come out of it, but I'm going to leave them to the end. So I think we'll go straight in and see what Sean has to tell us about today.
Yeah, thank you. So, g'day, I'm Sean. So I'm a registered provider for the NDIS. And if I wind the clock back about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I saw a flurry in the market that sort of, I guess, motivated me to really investigate this space a lot deeper. Sorry, just give me 2 secs. Perfect. So what motivated me was back in 2016, 2017, I saw a shift towards housing, or the shift from the NDIS to get participants, I guess, out of aged care facilities into general housing. What I saw was a plethora in the market that really led itself to real poor design practice that I would, I guess, say was a band-aid solution for getting participants out of aged care facilities. I acknowledged myself as a designer, as quite a good designer, I guess, separating my ego aside. I recognised that I had some really good design traits or design abilities. And that motivated me to consider this space, the NDIS space, or in particular, the SDA space a lot deeper. What I found over the years has allowed me to sort of, really appreciate the depth of the space for the participants living within these homes. And I guess really curate a design form based on housing topology for each of the different SDA categories. So in 2017, 2018, I embarked on becoming a registered provider for the NDIS. That took me about maybe a year and a half of auditing and quite a long, thorough process. And the intent there was to sort of back myself in the industry to say, hey, look, I'm waving the banner here as someone that's really considerate of participant wellbeing. And I want to design spaces that are really conducive to wellbeing and fit for purpose housing outcomes. That led me to working with many different builders, providers over the years. And my purpose of, I guess, this webinar is to show you some examples of some of the projects that I've worked on over the years and talk about why it may be important to consider working with a designer that sort of understands the SDA space, the NDIS space particularly well. So I'm just taking a look at some of the notes and then I'll start speaking into some of them. Typically what happens would be a client would engage me, and there's various different clients, developers, mum and dad investors, a whole range, different builders, etc. What we look at initially is the feasibility, the land study, so taking a closer look at the land, town planning aspect, engaging in access consult, looking at the some of the parameters in relation to town planning, and workshop each of those that sort of provide downward pressure on the initial design. And so some of the things that usually come up on land procurement for example, is landfall, land slope, how we work around some of those that then affect the design outcome. So I guess if you could imagine a home or a development that has slope across it, then having ramps at the front of it isn't particularly visually appealing. And then how that sort of branches off and affects other areas down the line, be it if it's a group home model, for example, covenants and some restrictions around that. So a client would typically engage, we would get an initial assessment done in terms of what SDA design category to design to. Typically of late, they've been a mix of both robust and high physical support dwellings. And as Lauren noted, the HPS category can open up other areas available, for instance, fully accessible participants and other participants on that SDA design, on those design categories. We then look at preparing a design-based brief that usually is working with all key stakeholders, and that just itemises the type of housing topology to work to. So it may be, for instance, a 3-bedroom group home model at high physical support. And then these are some of the key parameters around it, or it could be a villa development, or it could be an apartment dwelling. What I will do once I sort of get down the rabbit hole a bit is show you a few examples of each of these different housing spreads and housing topologies, and speak into, I guess, some of the framework and parameters and I guess initial roadblocks around that.
Sorry, Sean, just to interrupt, are you meant to be sharing your screen at the moment, or you're not yet?
I can do.
Oh, I just wondered if you were talking to some of your slides. Sorry, I'll leave you with it.
No, all good. I will jump into that. Okay, so let me just quickly read over my notes. So just quickly on the feasibility study, for instance, so there's a land assessment, and the land is all varying, and there's a whole range. It could be an estate, it could be an infill site, and each different council LGA has a whole different range of parameters. Each state has a whole range of different parameters. So typically we would get a town planning report done that itemises, I guess, an oversight of the project and some of the framework or design parameters to contain the design within. So that may be things like project setbacks, acoustics, if there's any fire, a whole range of different spinning parameters that affect the design outcome. We then look at the housing topology that may be appropriate to that to maximise the SDA funding allocation available for that particular design. So it may be a villa model, or I'll speak into this down the track, where I've fused a group home model in a villa design, and that allows it to achieve a villa funding allocation. And then, yeah, just other considerations, site fall, ramping, engineering advice, cross-fall to the street, any visual impacts, etc. Typically, we would then seek engagement, and we would then work indirectly with the town planner and access consultant and start preparing some concept designs. So what I will do quickly is share my screen and talk you through some examples of the different housing topologies that I've done, I guess, even over the past 6 months. So just give me 2 secs. So this one is a group home model in Victoria, and it's intentionally designed larger than standard. And we've worked with an SDA provider down there in Victoria. And so what I'll do is I'll talk you through some of the key design elements or some of the key design takeaway that really sort of maximise participant wellbeing. We'll also talk into some of the buildability aspects that can really impact, I guess, build costs and some roadblocks down the track, if not accounted for early on in the design. So this one's a 3-bedroom group home model in Victoria. And so,
sorry to interrupt again there, Sean. I'm just not sure if you've got something on your screen that's blocking
sorry,
the bottom. Just the bottom left corner there seems to be blocking part of the slide. So
my apologies. Let me know.
I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, look, everybody's going to get a copy of these slides anyway. If you can't quite see each of them, you can refer back. Oh, we've just made it worse.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, that's slightly better. I think we're right to go with that.
Yep. Okay, my apologies. I'll see if I can zoom it in a little bit. So yeah, this one's a high physical support dwelling down in Victoria. What I wanted to speak into in this one, when we get to a group home model, which this example is, at high physical support, we tend to find that participants tend to become more inclusive of their own individual spaces opposed to living together. And so what we've tried to include in each of the participant rooms is wheel-in robes, and they act not only for storage, but also ergonomic for participants as they, as the carers work with the participants in terms of the transfer between the ensuite, the wheel-in robes, and the bedrooms. And so what we find is it also provides I guess, privacy for the participants as well. So this home's intentionally designed larger than SDA design standards. And so it allows, for instance, in participant one bedroom, a carer to clothe and bathe the participant in privacy separate from the main bedroom. What it also allows is then any future fitting for TVs or something to this extent where traditionally en-suites to participant rooms would open onto, thus minimising usable wall space to wall-hung a TV, for instance. They also include just general lifestyle elements like participant desks in each of these room spaces. What's also very considerate of these designs is the placement of the OOA, and this is during the rotation of the carer throughout the shifts. And traditionally on designs, they've been either at the front of the home or centered into the home, but lending itself to having the carer come in through the home and then back into each of these spaces. What we find, or what I've found, is that provides a level of noise transfer that can, I guess, upset participants during the rotation of those shifts. So I try to cleverly design or be mindful of the location of the OOA where they have 3 points of contact to enter into the space. So for instance, if they were parking on the driveway, for instance, they can come around and into the OOA separate from the main house, thus not impacting participants residing in the space. Or it may be an instance where they could come through the garage or traditionally in through the home as well. Is that screen sharing at all there properly, Deb? Can you?
Yeah, no, that's all fine.
Yep.
We can see that. There's just a little grey bar over on the left, but that's not impacting much of the space. So all good.
Yeah. All good. All right. So the other elements that are to be really mindful of, I guess, is the site slope and some of the parameters around cut and fill and the extent in terms of zero threshold ramping, falls for the pass, access required into the home, etc. So there's a closer relationship really provided in terms of the building pad to ensure that it meets across full requirements and the entry into the home. So on this instance, for example, we nominate the pad level and the finished surface level to demonstrate the critical height requirements for the builder to ensure that they get the levels absolutely correct in terms of the perimeter pass and the access to the street. This can be quite a hiccup on a lot of jobs for designers that perhaps don't understand the extent of site cut, some of the cut and fill, retaining walls, ramps, etc. And it can lead to examples of having ramps at the front of the home that look unsightly and sort of characterize it as being I guess, a disability-based house. And so there's a real close relationship between the house siding, the cut and fill extents, levels, retaining walls to ensure that, we get compliance to the street. Some of the other elements to be mindful of in terms of the buildability is, for example, the construction methodology in terms of brick veneer, Hebel, lightweight construction. What can occur is you require zero threshold ramping. And in Queensland, for instance, you have a minimum step down of 50 millimeters. With SDA dwellings, we need 35 millimeters, which tends itself to needing a performance solution via a hydraulic engineer to sign off on zero threshold ramping and the abutment of, like, for example, strip drains or threshold ramps, for instance. This affects a whole host in terms of the buildability, which means there's consideration required in terms of perimeter hobs to allow, I guess, concrete paths to embut correctly for the DPC and termite inspection. And a lot of these considerations aren't at the forefront of the designer unless they're skilled or understanding of this when they're designing these spaces. So an example of this is, for example, on this site plan where on the slab plan where we've nominated the hobs for the brick veneer. This is to ensure compliance with zero threshold ramping, DPC, visual, etc. What has occurred in the past where this construction detail isn't followed, you have a whole host of issues down the line where it becomes non-compliant, and I guess a lot of finger pointing and a lot of issues. So yeah, it really stresses the importance of having the right designer who understands holistically, I guess, the approach or the buildability aspect, not only the design aspect as well. So I thought I'd also show you through a typical set of documentation. So this is, I guess, a typical working drawing set of documentation that's, I guess, very thorough and very precise. So it has a whole host of notes for, I guess, SDA compliance from the access consultant, as well as the buildability aspect for the builder. And so, yeah, I'll just go through that quickly. We include everything in terms of all the internal joinery documentation, all the clear space notes, all the circulation space that's required, all the modelled outcomes, for example, the auto egress doors, everything that's required. And so it's quite thorough documentation. And again, one that if you don't have the right designer can cause a number of issues. Like, for example, I'll use this kitchen, for instance. We nominate 650 millimeters for the set out of the bench top. The SDA design requirements mandate 600. So in the early days of SDA, what I found or observed was that there was a lot of issues where builders were having to rip out kitchens because whilst the designs were allowing for 600 millimeters, they weren't also inclusive of the finished layers. So, for example, villa board or plasterboard and tiles. So the SDA assessor would come out on site, measure it, and it may be 580 millimeters from the edge of the bench to the tiles, or 570 millimeters, which is non-compliance, which means a builder has to rip out their kitchen in order to rectify. And so it speaks to me that that the designer isn't understanding the exacting requirements to be achieved for some of those design outcomes, as an instance. And so, yeah, there's a lot of documentation, ceiling hoists, circulation space, set outs for vanities, showers, bathrooms, en suites, all the different detail, all the notes that are, I guess, required for compliance and buildability. And then all the construction diagrams that are required for SDA approval. So door hardware, external door thresholds, clear space requirements in car parking, lifting frame details, door set outs, electrical set outs on high physical support dwellings, typical ensuite falls, door clear space requirements, spec relating to the auto egress door feature on high physical support dwellings, sectional detail for drains, so performance solution requirements, and then eventually fire evacuation diagrams, fire sprinkler designs, landscaping plans showing finished floor levels, plant selections, concrete hardstand set-outs with slip resistance, accessibility requirements, typical construction detailing schedule with notes pertinent to that specific design. So this is just one example of, I guess, a group home model. I'll just see if I can show some other examples. This other example is a robust and high physical support dwelling in Toowoomba, and it's a combination, of a high physical support villa as well as a robust villa on the back end of the site. At the time of the design, the robust villa had a platinum design and silver design, which circles back to sill level guidelines. And there's a whole host of buildability design outcomes in terms of firewalls, engineers, building classifications, a whole sort of, conga line of information that I guess really I'm the gatekeeper for in terms of formulating these designs and still providing designs that flow very well. So on the platinum spec, we've got a kitchen, one participant with the breakout room OOA. The OOA has its own kitchenette as well as own ensuite, and then a living area and dining area within that as well. Each of them have the recess element for the TVs, and then some sensory elements in terms of acoustic, in terms of perimeter fencing, etc. So I won't paint too much over the design. I just wanted to show a quick example of a villa development down there in Toowoomba. All the construction detail, all the, information pertinent toward the buildability aspect, firewall detail, needing an engineer to sign off on it, all the kitchen, all the internal spec and joinery detail. So a lot of information, a lot of, spec in relation to that. Construction diagrams, fire sprinkler, evacuation diagrams, etc. And then this one's down in Taree in New South Wales. This is a villa development that we're at the concept design phase 4. And so working with the developer on this one, it's really how can we maximize, or what can we put on the site? And on this, it's a 3 villa development. So Villa 1, 2, and 3 with an OOA on top. So each of these participants have their own independent spaces, be it similar to an apartment, but the actual design form is quite modern, quite conducive to modern design trends. So the developer on this one was prepared to, spend more in terms of the visual aspect or design aesthetic, recognizing that there is an oversupply of housing with participants wanting something more discerning and more quality in design. So you can see that through, the curves and the arches, which are on trend, breeze blocks, battens, etc. Then on the other end, this is an intentional development down in Adelaide. It's an apartment building that's designed at high physical support. Some of the parameters in which, in order to get to this design, is quite challenging, just given the odd nature of the land. And so, there's a whole mix there of what we need to do to achieve a design. So working with the town planner to establish basically the building envelope or our setbacks of what can be achieved on the site, minimum design development outcomes, so bin storage, car parking requirements, visitor car parking, accessibility car parking, etc. We're then able to branch off into a number of different apartments. And so this is quite a challenging land allotment down there in Port Adelaide, but you can see each of the apartments have not only a participant room at high physical support, but also a guest room for either family coming and going, or perhaps independent SDA providers who may be overseeing different care for different participants. In this one, be it a intentional development, one SDA provider is overseeing the development of the project. So we've included 2 OOAs with rest areas, staff quarters in the project. But yeah, there's a lot of design parameters that I've got to spin through in order to get a design that flows and works and achieves developer briefs, as well as town planning for each of these different areas. Another one is just a quick group home model, but this one's been designed, I guess, being fit for purpose housing. So quite a nice looking home with rake ceilings, rafters, just really mindful of participants that are living within the space. This one's only a 2-bedroom participant space, again with a centered OOA, but it has a beautiful rake ceiling that is real mindful of participant well-being. Things like mosaic brickwork on the patio walls, for instance, just to really instill that sensory element for participants. If you can sort of see, it has a beautiful rake ceilings in the living dining area to really maximise the aesthetic of the home. And again, just the full construction detail, etc. on that one. The next one I wanted to just talk through real quickly was a villa model. And the intent here is trying to, fuse that investor model in the group home model, for instance. So it looks like a group home model, but opposed to being 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms under a group home model, this fits on a 14 by 33 metre lot, and they end up being individual villas with an OOA and 2 guest suites. So it then allows it to probably sit in a Class 1B building classification, or perhaps a Class 3 subject to further assessment. But the intent is that these become 2 individual spaces for the participants. So they're essentially like their own homes. But the overall design of it is comparable to a group home model, as is the spec and as is, I guess, the build cost element as well. However, you open yourself up to higher participant funding availability based off the villa model in this housing typology, so in this villa model, but it allows the participant to have its own independent space. So designing at high physical support also captures it in other SDA categories. So for instance, fully accessible participants would be eligible for it as well. It also allows some design options in terms of the OOA or the care at the front of the home, where perhaps it may be 2 carers serving each of these different villas, where they can utilise the guest suites, where we can then add secondary bathrooms to these spaces. So as a baseline design option, it allows itself to branch off into multiple different design options dependent on each of the different I guess, investors that are looking at the product, means that you would likely have a participant that would stay there long term because they're having their own independent space, their own independent home, opposed to a group home model. So yeah, works quite well. I've also fused this on another design where this fits on, I guess, infill sites in inner areas. So on CBD fringes, for instance, on knockdown rear build sites. So you could achieve this on a 10 by 33 meter deep lot. So it looks very in keeping with a lot of design trends at the moment, so curves, arches, etc. But what it has is, I guess, a rooftop terrace and then 2 villas for participants that's accessible by a lift. So you could almost imagine this in inner urban areas, Southport, inner Brisbane, inner Sunshine Coast, for instance, that have prevailing views across the site. And so it allows participants to have their own independent spaces, again, villas, or that apartment, their own alfrescos, etc., but fits on quite neat infill sites. And then has a coming together of like a rooftop terrace where it may have prevailing views accessible by a lift. It also has a common OOA then to service the participants. But the design also then lends itself to other, I guess, design categories that may not be within SDA. It could lend itself to STA or MDA, which is medium-term accommodation or short-term accommodation. So again, yeah, a lot of different design options. So there are a few examples. I'll just see if I can touch base to my screen again. Sorry, I'm just trying to jump back to my main screen. And so some of the other impacts, I guess, over the coming months will be the introduction of the NCC changes. So things like energy efficiency, some of the acoustics that play sort of that provide downward pressure on build costs and I guess the design form. The impact of fire sprinklers. So inherently including fire sprinklers in a lot of these different design housing topologies or design options, so high physical support, fully accessible, etc., to avoid retrofitting them. Yeah, beyond that, that's, I guess, hopefully a bit of an insight into my world, if that's not too much of a mishmash of information as such.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Sean. That was really, really informative. Loved all the different designs you have. I did have a couple of questions that came out of that. Firstly, you were talking about group homes, but I think you were talking more about shared living homes. Under the NDIS, the definition of a group home is 4 participants or 5 participants.
Yeah, correct.
So,
yeah.
Now, regarding the collaboration process, obviously, you went into the amount of specialists that need to be involved with you at that planning stage, such as structural, building engineers that need to ensure compliance because of the precise nature of how those plans must be. I guess, how much collaboration has been with other specialists, such as allied health workers, occupational therapists, such as Lauren, or providers? So how much of your process has involved
Yeah,
those people?
yeah, correct. So there's two stages to it. The first one is generally I try to take advice from persons like Lauren or SDA providers to really get an insight in terms of how they're interacting or flowing with these spaces. That allows me then to reflect deeper, I guess you would say, outside of the design world, to be real mindful of the flow and movements of these spaces. However, when it becomes development specific or project specific, I guess you would say, the key or the first point of contact usually is these SDA providers to work out, I guess, what they're looking to extract from some of these designs, and then workshopping some design, I guess, outcomes. So, for instance, the share house in Victoria, I worked with a provider down there to workshop some different design outcomes. So, for instance, that was a term of the wheel-in robe, where these spaces could become a bit better in terms of the ergonomic use. So they're not designed at the design minimum. So a 1600 or an 1800 wide robe and a bed and an ensuite. We've then introduced a ensuite that then's private and a wheel-in robe that then's private. So any comings or goings and the interaction of that space is private. And so I guess that information is quite fed from these SDA providers, where then I'm able to fuse that in those initial designs or concepts, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and that would be really important. I also wanted just to touch on, and it's something that when we're talking to investors and other people, say, well, if you have a property that's designed at the high physical support level, it can also be tenanted by people with fully accessible or improved livability funding. Now, Lauren, this is maybe something more for you to answer. I'm not sure, or both of you. I have heard from some people that in some cases a high physical support home, whilst it should cover everything that a improved livability tenant may need, it may not actually be compliant. There might need to be some minor modifications made. Is that your understanding as well, or?
That would be my understanding as well. That's coming into, I guess, some of the bathroom configurations and layouts. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, sorry. I've generally noted that under the HPS banner that you open yourself up to fully accessible participants. Yeah, just let me think about that one, because I have done some improved livability designs. I'll just need to go back into them and take a closer look at the detail.
Yeah, and I guess that question also too refers to robust properties that can also supposedly take improved livability tenants, but there may be some minor changes that would need to be done to the finished product to actually make them compliant. But I guess that's maybe more from an OT's perspective. There are certain things that would need to be just adjusted a little bit.
Well, that's where, sorry to cut you off, that's, I guess, where the platinum and the silver spec come into it from the robust housing. So the platinum usually includes the breakout room, for instance, whereas the silver level spec, I guess, meets the LHA guidelines on that silver spec, which then sort of subsets into the improved livability as such. So I guess a platinum spec is really for a participant that needs that sort of design, I guess. Whereas the silver spec opens itself up into the improved livability category as well.
Lauren, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, from our side, we tend to need to make those minor modifications anyway to make sure that we are still client-centered and participant-centered with our looking for properties for our participants. So we can also look at that, but sometimes we find that the actual properties aren't able to be changed that much. So if we needed to go and get something for sensory needs, for instance, or make those changes, or we've had instances where because the client needed an H-track hoist, there was only options for a single track hoist due to design.
Can
So
you explain what that is that you're talking about?
So the
H-track and
H-track hoist basically is in the shape of an H, and it gives you more movability or transferability for a carer to help a participant, say for instance, from bed to the side, up and down. And it maximizes the use of the room. So if you have a little bit more space constraints or needing a two-carer assist, it then helps with being able to transfer to increased the amount of equipment that you're transferring to, or specialized equipment, because that's what the spaces also need to incorporate, is that the participants will come in with specialized equipment, specialized wheelchairs, commodes, tilt and space chairs, and the H-track allows for that. But sometimes, because of space constraints or compliance, as Sean will be able to from a design aspect, then they can only actually fit in the single track hoist, which is one track which can go basically transfer a participant from their bed to something right directly next to the bed.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go into a couple of questions here. Is there a summary infographic that explains the most important design factors? I can probably answer that. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who asked that question. It was an anonymous attendee. There are some good summary articles on the actual SDA design specifications, and I can possibly, I think, I'll come back to you with the name of the company. You could probably find that on the website. Tim, if you were supplying fire sprinkler system, what class of system do you require? Sean might get you to answer that one.
What class of system?
I'm guessing maybe we're talking about class 1, class 3.
Yeah, correct. So
in Brisbane, Tim has just qualified his question.
Yep. So I guess it really depends on the building classification. So if it's beyond 300 square meters, then it may come into a class 3 building, which then, yeah, needs appropriate fire rating and fire check. And so that's where we get an assessment done, fire assessment done, who does a management plan for the fire sprinklers and the ancillary detail like the firewalls. It needs a sign off from an engineer.
Yeah, and I think it does differ from state to state too, Tim. So obviously you're asking specific to Queensland. I believe that New South Wales has now implemented a rule whereby all SDA properties, unless the participants are able to actually evacuate themselves, all properties must be built to class 3 requirements. Because essentially a class 3 is a care home with more than one tenant who is not related, I believe, basically is the classification there. But each state differs, different councils in each state differ. So I guess that's really keeping in mind that fire sprinklers probably should be fitted to pretty much all, certainly all of the higher level SDA homes, given that there may be a mandate from the NDIS down the track that all SDAs do have fire sprinklers. So it's certainly a good idea to put them in at this stage, but whether it's class 1 or class 1B, I think, isn't it? Or class 1A?
Yeah, class 1B.
1B or class 3 is more, I guess, based on the local government or council requirements.
Yep.
Just back to the previous question from the anonymous attendee about the infographic. It's not an infographic, but there is a really good overview of the SDA categories based on the design guidelines, and you'll find that on the SDA consulting website. Has some really good information there, so hopefully you'll be able to find that. Okay. Oh, and Tim has also mentioned a house and land package, approximately 250 square meters, built to HPS. So you did mention, Sean, that if the property was more than 300 meters, it should be
Yeah,
class 3.
so if it's beyond 300 square meters, then yeah, it'll likely be class 3. But if it's under, then it'll likely be class 1B. So because it's a 2-bedroom model, it's my understanding that it wouldn't need fire sprinklers. However, there's a few different variables to it. When it is beyond 3 bedrooms, it usually can cause issues with planning, where you need to get a hydraulic assessment done and a fire assessment done because of the impact that that has on local infrastructure, I guess you would say. In terms of the fire element, yeah, I believe it wouldn't need one, but as Deb said, it would be best to include fire sprinklers, yeah, in the design.
Yeah, so some of you may not realize that you can put in fire sprinklers, but the building is still classified as a 1B under the National Construction Code. If you're building it to class 3 under the National Construction Code, it requires a lot more in the build and the design. Not just fire sprinklers, you need to have the back to base, you need to have more soundproofing, thicker walls. There's a whole lot of different things, are there not, Sean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the list is very long and very very precise, and that was again some of the detail I was trying to speak into in terms of the building methodology, and then on top of that, land procurement, site for all of these different spinning parts that make a real impact on the viability of a lot of these projects. And why it is important to, I guess, have a good designer that understands those impacts, because the price can then do ramps, cross ramps with rails and all sorts of different things. They can be very, very expensive. So
yeah, for
yeah.
sure. Now, I want to backtrack a bit. And Lauren, I'm going to throw a question at you. We've been talking about the design predominantly now. Are there any problems that you've seen in designs that really stand out to you in some of the SDA buildings out there?
The main ones that I find is just turning circles if you're then going to consider having 2 carers. So if a person has 1 to 2 care, so although the SDA has to look at the bricks and mortar, and that's what the funding is, we also got to consider the packages that the participants are also funded with. And sometimes that is then having 2 carers for certain aspects of daily living. So we've had minimum requirements of, say, for example, wall to toilet, but there's no ways that we can then fit 2 carers, 1 on either side, due to other dimensions and space. So I think that's the biggest thing that we find in the OT NDIS space, is just when considering the holistic package or participants care package, where you need to consider all of those people that are helping, or if they're doing more of the ILO model, where you've got some of the informal supports that are actually helping with the support work. You've got to consider that in terms of being able to successfully complete your activities of daily living for a participant.
Yeah, and this goes back to, I guess, those minimum design guidelines that you mentioned at the beginning are in many cases not adequate, and you've got to be maximizing on so many different levels what the design actually looks like.
Yeah,
yeah.
But I like with some of Sean's designs, with having those almost self-contained units for participants, so that even if they're funded for 1 to 3, they sort of still can have that privacy within their home. And I think that's the biggest drawbacks. So when we're working with participants trying to find them a home, I've had participants say, well, I don't want to sort of see someone every day. I want to be able to have my own space due to high anxiety, due to all of these other factors that haven't been considered. And that's sometimes where there's a lot of SDA participants that have been funded for SDA and actually are choosing not to go into SDA properties because of concerns like that, where, well, I don't want to live with other people.
They don't want to live with, in a group home. They want to have their own space.
Exactly. And I've had a participant say, if you you sort of advocated for so with a 1 to 3, because that's what she would have been, or SDA, she said she would have run away. So I said, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And it's that consideration of actual that you're designing these spaces for people that you need to take into consideration.
For sure.
Yeah, that was going to be my key point, and thank you for picking that up, Lauren. In that sort of shared house, group house model, traditionally they're in that 250 to 300 square meters, and maybe all the rooms have been designed at minimum. Whereas housing that I've done within that I guess typology, I've intentionally made the en-suites and the rooms bigger. And as I spoke into, like, having the en-suites not facing the room, for instance, allows then a TV to be more hung on the wall, for instance. And so that allows a participant then to have their own internal independent space, opposed to the traditional shared home, group home model at high physical support, for instance, where they're living on top of each other because the rooms have been designed at minimum. And so, there's a real closer relationship in terms of that design and that flow to ensure participant well-being, is first and foremost.
Yeah, I saw that the first design you were showing us, Sean, was a 3-tenant plus OOA house. Only had one living space. I'm not sure if that was an older design or just because the bedrooms were bigger, it was felt potentially it wasn't required. Your thoughts on that?
That was my comment in relation to those rooms are about maybe 20% larger than the minimum SDA design guidelines, as is the en-suites. The en-suites are probably almost 30%. And so the intent there is that whilst there's 3 bedrooms in that, the participant at HPS is likely going to stay in that room than intermingling in the general common space. So there's much more consideration in terms of the room placement. So again, the items like I spoke into, like the desk, the wheel-in robe, the TV, that space becomes more inclusive for them. It also is important in terms of the balance of the spread of the participant rooms, meaning that one of the rooms was towards the alfresco, and then one had passive surveillance across the street, and then one was in the centre of the home that was separated by the ensuite, the walk-in robe, so noise transfer was minimum. So there's a real closer relationship in terms of how those participants are living and interacting in this space, opposed to a comparable model, which would have been, again, 250 to 300 square meters, everything designed at the minimum, and then the participants living in one living space. And so, it's being really mindful of those participants and those rooms and what they're living in.
Absolutely.
And so, sorry to segue this, that's what made me really consider like that villa example, which then is sort of being mindful of these shared home and group home models, where they can be still in a sort of freehold looking home as such, but they're then their own independent villas, they're their own independent houses as such, but still fall in a class 1B because they're under 300 square meters. So they get their own home, their own independent spaces. And so, trying to fuse that middle ground between that shared group home model and then the villa model, and then investor expectation and provider expectation on top of that as well.
For sure, yeah. Lauren, could I ask you, this is one off the cuff. I just thought, have you got any case studies you'd like to share with us where you've seen a participant's life just so transformed with the right SDA home?
Yeah, I've got one that comes to mind where because of her degenerative nature of her disability, her functional capacity actually deteriorated quite quickly, and before she knew it, she was actually sort of bound to the top level of her home because of these stairs coming in. There's steep stairs in the home, and we managed to get the funding approved, and she was able to get into a fully accessible home. And when you're looking at task analysis and that holistic picture, she was able to play with her grandchildren again. That wasn't confined to her own room upstairs. She was able to go out into the garden with them, where she hadn't been able to do that for 12 months. And it's those type of like task analysis where you're looking not only of, okay, bathing, kitchen, etc. If you're looking at task analysis of what the participant or the person needs to be able to do or wants to be able to do, that's where you see such a great outcome, where you do get a positive outcome through the NDIS, because then you can see all these other tasks that sometimes maybe others don't think about or don't get to see. And I think that was the biggest for me, is being able to just interact with grandchildren again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. What about you, Sean? I'm sure that you don't have as much interaction with the end user, i.e. the tenants of these homes, but I'm not sure, maybe you have at some stage and seen your designs, how it has been life-changing for them.
Yeah, so I'll give example of one of the ones that I showed that has the red ceiling in it down in New South Wales. So that's midway through construction. And whilst this isn't particularly the end user or the end participant, however, that design sent a little bit of a flurry in Port Macquarie where it's being built. And it was referred to as the Taj Mahal of SDA spaces, because to date, the quality of design that was coming through in that particular area was very poor. And so that was the first home where, on all levels, all stakeholders had I guess, an involvement. And the feedback then was, this is next level housing, I guess you would say. And so, yeah, it really spoke into, I guess, some of the key critical components and detail that really is a reflection of me trying to think about these participants and their well-being. But beyond that, I don't have so much interaction with the end participant living in the space. I can only judge from feedback that I get from developers and builders. And I guess that's why I'm very active in this space, because the general comments have been, been very humbling, I guess might be the key word to use, and very gratifying in terms of the years I've genuinely spent trying to understand this space. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sean. Well, I think we might wrap it up there. Have you got any last words you'd like to leave us with today before we get going?
I'll let you lead, Lauren.
I think we just need to be mindful that of the end user. So I think Sean and I are at the opposite ends of the spectrum here, where I see the participant side of things, where he's actually catering to the designer aspect for the participant. And I think if we keep in mind that it is a person that we are designing these spaces into, and for the builders, etc., and the investors, if they keep that in mind when designing these spaces and putting investments into these spaces, that's where you'll reap the biggest sort of reward in whichever outcome you are looking for in whatever business you're in. So if we're all just keeping holistic and client-centered, we'll each reach the outcomes that we are looking for in our various places of work.
Yeah, and I would sort of conclude by saying that, yeah, much like Lauren, I'm very motivated by the end user. I'm often reflecting on a Friday night, thinking about how these spaces can be designed better. So I would suggest that it's really important to partner any clients, builders, investors, etc., with an appropriate designer that sort of holistically understands the approach in which the multiple channels of information are coming in to create designs that are really fit for purpose housing. I mean, for me as a building design practice, I could be operating in multiple different design areas, commercial property, residential, etc. But I find myself always sort of pivoting towards the disability and the SDA space because I really find it important to give back to community, give back to people where myself, I guess, as a quote unquote able-bodied person's able to move around move around freely. I really feel for parts of society that are often forgotten about. And then the impact of, I guess, building design or houses and developments in general can play on these participants living in these spaces and their well-being, and I guess the impact that that has on their life. So it just motivates me. It's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning and really, yeah, makes me just continually try to evolve this space in whatever shape or form that looks like.
And
So,
it is
yeah.
continually evolving, that's for sure. So.
Yeah, hard work.
Well, look,
Hard work.
thank you so very much to you both, Lauren and Sean. Appreciate your time today in giving some of our viewers a really good insight into, yeah, the design thoughts and concepts behind building good quality SDA that actually works. So I think we'll leave it there. And thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Dave.